All right, welcome to the Blue Skies Political Podcast. I'm Erin O'Toole, Member of Parliament for Durham, and today I have a very special guest. Welcome, Stephanie Kusie.
Thank you very much, Erin. It's great to be here.
Now, I'm a by-election winner. I won a by-election in November 2012. You're a by-election winner as well, so we'll call this the by-election foreign policy episode.
Remind me again who you replaced.
I replaced the Honourable Bev Oda.
Oh, well, of course, yes. How could I forget that?
Yes, yeah. And who did you replace?
Well, I get asked this everyone knows this. I replaced Jason Kenney.
The next Premier of Alberta.
That's right, the next Premier of Alberta. But I tell you, Aaron, I feel like I should go around wearing a T-shirt. I'm sorry, I'm not Jason Kenney. It's pretty hard to follow that guy.
You're the new and improved Jason Kenney.
Oh, well, that's what he said. He said a big improvement over the predecessor, but... he's doing amazing things for our province, so it's certainly hard to walk in those shoes.
Those are big shoes within the Conservative movement.
It's true.
But getting to know you over the last year or so, I can say you fit them well.
You're kind.
They have a little higher heel.
They do.
These shoes, but but look, it seems like you've been on the team, and you and I talk a lot of foreign policy. I'm the shadow minister. I seek your advice, but you've only been here about 15 months. When was your by-election? What were you doing before that?
So my by-election was actually April 3rd, 2017. And of course, being from Alberta, you work very hard during the election, but it's the nomination, which is just so killer. And I'd started in July, June or July the year before. So it was a solid year of campaigning. So I was just so very relieved when it was finally over. And I was very fortunate. I had about a month before I came into the House. And I needed that time. But previous to that, I was actually at Global Affairs Canada, and I mean, since that time, it's gone through a lot of different names. I knew it mostly as DFATE, but I had a great career there, starting in 2002. I'm very fortunate to have gained some linguistic skills there. I arrived not speaking a lot of French, so the first thing they did was send me to Gatineau for 15 months to become completely bilingual. After that, I spent some time in the operations center, so managing the consular calls of people abroad as well as emergencies abroad where we had Canadians. But I was very fortunate to have 3 postings. The first was in Argentina. And this
wonderful.
is, I love this place. And I love, Evita Peron is actually one of my role models, just a very strong woman.
Strong leader.
Yeah, who was able to obtain power. Not everyone likes how she obtained that power, but nonetheless.
And then after Argentina?
After that, I went to El Salvador. I was the chargé des affaires there for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was very lucky because it was probably the best time in El Salvador's recent history. The Civil War had been over for 15 years. There was a lot of support from the United States at that time, and it was probably, and I should add a center of right government, something that you and I like, what's called the arena at the time. So it was really probably the most peaceful, prosperous time in its recent history, because it's gone downhill a little bit since the left-leaning government, the FMLN, which of course has the background of the Civil War within it. It's sort of gone not as strong as when I was there. And then finally I was the Deputy Consul General in Dallas, Texas.
In the US.
Yeah, that's right. And I had great barbecue, great Mexican food, believe you me. I always say I love the climate because a December day there was 10 degrees Celsius, not the minus 35 we see here in January. And I love the access to consumer goods. There you could get like 10 brands of Snuggle, and like 12 different kinds of toothpaste. Yeah,
they're the best of the free
market. Best of the best, but it was kind of an environment of futility because President Obama was there at the time, and our main objective was the Keystone Pipeline. So I was essentially advocating for going to hearings for something that would never come to be.
No intention.
Yeah, exactly. So
well, going back to I often say one of the big distinctions between Conservatives and Liberals when it comes to foreign policy is Conservatives generally refocus and almost redouble efforts in the Americas. You look at we were probably the most swift response to the earthquakes in Haiti.
Completely.
The Mulroney government,
Chile,
after decades of us not being at the table of the Organization of American States, it was a Conservative government signed on. You also worked for our Minister of State in charge of Latin America before your diplomatic career, and now you're in caucus with that person.
That's right. Yes, Peter Kent. How can you not have respect for this guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he just had an incredible career as a journalist. He would just tell us crazy stories about his adventures abroad. So it was easy to go and work with someone who had that type of legitimacy and credibility already.
But is that also fair to say that conservatives do take a more detailed look at our own hemisphere than the Liberals tend to?
Absolutely, yes, because we are practical people that want to have actual influence and make change in the world in regards to democracy, justice, and the rule of law. With the Liberals, it's virtue signaling, and it's thinking about the next election. It's never actually promoting the principles that we as conservatives believe in.
Yeah, well, let's use this as a perfect segue to talk Venezuela, because certainly there's no one in the House of Commons who has, on either side, that has as much unique diplomatic experience and political experience advising a minister on South and Central America than you.
Thank you.
Watching the Chavez Maduro regime basically suck the capacity and the potential out of an amazing country like Venezuela must have been horrific for somebody that's worked in and around it. What are your thoughts on the whole decline of Venezuela since 1997-98 when Chavez came in?
Well, I certainly will say, without question, it's very unfortunate. I think it's sort of spiraled the way that so many governments do. They come in on a first term. They don't do a lot of things that are incredibly alarming. They're able to win a second-term mandate, and that's when all hell breaks loose. And I think that's certainly something that we saw there. Certainly for a long time, Foreign Affairs Canada still had a diplomatic presence in Venezuela, because although objectionary, it was still tenable, it was still possible. And it's just absolutely hit an incredible decline. And certainly to a length we haven't seen before. I mean, we're always concerned about the Bolivarians in terms of the ALBA network, Bolivia, all these other small countries that went along with Venezuela. But the depth of corruption and misuse of leadership is really at an all-time low within Latin America. I mean, Latin America is historically known for dictatorships, whether you're talking Duvalier from Haiti or Pinochet. It has a long history of this, but in recent history, I don't think we've seen such a decline of a nation at this level. Now, Nicaragua's catching up, believe you me, but not at this level in recent history, and it's something that just goes beyond the pale in terms of devastation for its inhabitants and the region.
Well, and they nationalized. They set price controls. They ran huge deficits. They soaked oil revenues and diverted. So corruption, price controls, nationalization. They changed the constitution.
Yes, they did.
So you saw basically a state, and I worked when I was at Procter & Gamble with a lot of Venezuelans. We had a global center there. Many of them were coming to Canada wanting to stay. And to see what was the most prosperous and great country in Latin America with the most potential, stripped of that, has been terrible. And, all countries have been applying pressure. But recently, the OAS, the Organization of American States, has actually started to step up as a multilateral organization. I think that's very good. I've praised Secretary General Almagro for starting to call out one of their members. Have you been following the OAS developments, and what are your thoughts?
I have. Historically, I'm a very big believer in the OAS. I actually worked with Minister Kent on the Honduran coup in 2009. I went there as part of the Canadian delegation in an effort to work with Honduras to solve this problem. And I think for Canada, and for the OAS, I would like to say historically, it's always the path of democracy forward for the solution. That is always what we advocate for. Historically, again, things are changing a little bit with the virtue signaling, but as conservatives, we've advocated for the democratic path back to stability for these nations. That's something that we've done, and that's what I've historically respected the OAS for. And I think for the most part, we have seen that. This most recent motion that was defeated in terms of expelling Venezuela is very concerning, and it's concerning because it didn't happen. Now there are different possibilities as to why it did not happen. Some people say that it was a result of the U.S. not having a presence there in terms of sort of being more influential. I'm not convinced of that. I still believe in my heart that the OAS is an organization comprised of and made of the Latin people. So the U.S. of course also sort of fights, and we've seen articles refer to this, the label of imperialism within the Americas. So they're really sort of have these two things against them. One, there are certainly many Latinos within los Estados Unidos, but it is not a Latin state as we know the others. And then this history of imperialism. The second theory is in regards to, and I should add, as I'm sure you're well aware, that it was a small number of Caribbean states that shifted the balance from the 23 majority that was necessary to win the vote to, I've seen one report of 19, one report of 20, so I'm not sure which of the two was the actual final vote of those two. So were they paid off by Venezuela to vote to keep Venezuela within it? Although Venezuela says that it will leave by the end of next year voluntarily.
Well, because that motion didn't pass, but one did pass that basically said the May election of Maduro was not legitimate.
It wasn't,
which the West and Canada and the U.S. have been saying. Even in the run-up, when he was once again trying to change the Constitution, a sham election. At least now, I like what the OAS is doing. It's a multilateral organization actually trying to raise all boats, as opposed to the UN and some of the other multilateral organizations where, they let some of the worst offenders be on the Human Rights Committee, or they let Syria, a country that has used chemical weapons on its own people, to chair the Conference on Disarmament last month.
No, I agree.
So the OAS, I think, while there's still some politics, no question, I think it was good to see a multilateral organization call out Venezuela for its corrupt regime.
I agree, but it is also a critical turning point for them in that they ensure that corruption did not take place, and if it did, that it does not continue to take place, because it's very important, as you indicated, that they maintain the legitimacy and the credibility as a fair organization, and that they do not lose this in the way the United Nations has with so many people, and in fact many of our own membership.
Well, speaking of critical turning points, we can't end this podcast without talking about North Korea. Now, there was more of a bilateral meeting of President Trump and Kim Jong-un. A year ago, it didn't look with their Twitter war that we were going to get to a meeting like this. But the Korean Peninsula is somewhere Canada's been involved, in 1950 to 53.
You have a lot of knowledge on this.
Yeah, I visited. I laid a wreath at the war memorial there. We lost 516 Canadians, 26,000 served in the Korean War. There still is no cessation of that war. It's still just an armistice. But what are your thoughts? Pretty transformative to see the U.S. president and Kim Jong-un at least talking.
Yeah, it is. I think, though, the big question is, though, what does it mean? Because we've all read the articles where Trump comes back and he says, we are no longer at risk of a nuclear program with North Korea and nuclear war. And people aren't seeing any evidence to suggest that. That's the reality. We're just sort of going on his word of their conversation, and that's not really worth a lot. So I think people are wondering, like, okay, that happened, but what does it really mean?
Exactly. The communique said four things. Work towards peace and security between the U.S. and I always get a kick out of, they call themselves the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
That is quite
There's not much democratic in North Korea.
Not at all.
They want to work on peace on the peninsula and then work toward denuclearization, so no details, and then an exchange on prisoners of war and missing in action from the Korean conflict.
We saw how well that worked in Iran. Pardon me to interrupt.
Well, this is it. And I think with denuclearization, it will all be about verification and a timeline, wouldn't you say?
I would agree. I would agree with that, definitely. I'm not sure what it would look like, but something similar in terms of legitimate timeline and legitimate verifications that they are meeting the requirements of the timeline.
No, I think any time there is talking as opposed to saber rattling, I think it's good. Churchill had a great expression, it's better to jaw than to war.
Oh, I like that.
It's better to talk than to fight.
Yeah.
So the meeting between the South Korean President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un when he stepped across the DMZ was historic.
It was.
Weeks ago.
It was.
President Trump's meeting was historic, but it really has to be the first step
Yeah.
on a concrete set of, as you said, a timetable
Yeah.
that can be verified to show
Yeah.
that they're actually taking back, because we've actually seen them fire missiles in
Yes,
Japanese aerospace,
yes.
and there's more to the Korean Peninsula than just South Korea and the U.S. There's
It's
other
true.
players, right?
Well, of course. I think the path forward for this really has incredible implications. The two major players that come to me, of course, are Japan. I do wonder how Japan will react to all this. Of course, they're not what they were, if I may say, in the 90s, 25 years ago, but I still would be interested to sort of see where they land on this. But the big elephant is China, for sure. You know, what do they do? Because they've certainly, I think, used North Korea. Although they were rogue, they were kind of the same in their values of having no values, if I can say that. But then, you know, what do they do now if they start to play along with the United States of America and the rest of the world? It changes the dynamic entirely.
This will be a good one to watch. And the great thing is, now in our caucus, we have a former diplomat that I can go to and get your thoughts, get your perspective on things. I've appreciated it. And now you're one of the guests that's appeared on the Blue Skies Political Podcast. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Erin. I have nothing but respect for you. And I'm so glad that you are Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs. I'm super happy to work with you. And thank you so much for having me here today.
Wonderful. Well, Blue Skies is a conversation. So let us know what you think. Stephanie's on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. This will be out on YouTube, through the party, through my site. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about on Blue Skies, whether it's more foreign policy like this or another political issue, or we could just go on about how what a bad job Justin Trudeau's doing on so many things. That would be fun too.
I love that.
But thank you very much for tuning in. And thank you, Stephanie, for being a great part of our team.
Thank you, Erin.